So we're back on live. Let me see where Matt is. Now we're just waiting. Okay, so let's just stay in the comments for now. So since this is a new stream, I'm just going to say real quickly again, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, but decided to take a very objective approach to exploring this space, especially considering we're all human beings, and I find that we're going to get a lot more value from each other if we, at least start to communicate, right? We're allowed to disagree, but we're also allowed to communicate and educate one another on the exact positions that we argue, right? Especially when we're confronted with facts and, in a nice, pleasant manner. I think that we can accomplish a lot together, and I want to bridge the gap between, all this aggression. Um, I am still awaiting. I'm still awaiting word from Matt. Is possible he might have tried to restart his computer or anything like that. Posting the new stream real quick on Twitter here. Okay, going into this conversation, you know what? Is there anyone that wants to quickly message me on Twitter and jump in for a quick discussion? I can add you to the chat and we can have a small talk while we're waiting. If so, just message me. I'm gonna pay attention. But so going into this conversation, what are your initial opinions about XRP? Well, I'm gonna start with the most important thing to me, right? The most important thing to me is there's no way to justify a complete pre-mine of an entire market cap of a cryptocurrency and in the same sentence say that asset is decentralized. I don't care if the founding fathers of that cryptocurrency are the kindest gentlemen in the world and ladies and gentlemen in the world. There's no condition under which an entire pre-mine that immediately gets controlled by.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh,
so I don't know why that previous link wasn't working, but I think we're back.
Yo, Matt, pleasure to have you. All right, so let's say something for me again.
Yeah, my name's Matt. Sound check. Is this okay?
Yep, sounds excellent. And now we're, it looks like we have. All right, so let's promote this this link on Twitter real quick so that everyone knows. And thank you so much for coming on. I think our initial discussion was a little aggressive, and like right after I asked you about technical side, you went into the technical side, and I was like, excellent. Like that's what we need to do. We need to have a discussion based on facts, right? And it was excellent. I was so thankful that you were able to provide that, because after some time, and this is what I was explaining to some of the people that were watching a bit earlier. We're all human beings, right? We don't need to be, driving in a car, road rage and slamming our fists against the steering wheel. But then, you get out the car and it's like, are we really gonna fist fight each other over this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think this is a great opportunity to speak with you and for me to turn off my let's say my Bitcoin maximalism temporarily and be a neutral interviewer, and
Yeah.
I will be we'll be discussing numerous technical components as we discussed. And I think I'm pretty much going to give you the floor. I might ask a couple questions here and there. And then afterwards, I wanted to dive into some of the more controversial things that a Bitcoin maximalist would be turned off to with Ripple. So, if I'm not trying to throw you off guard. There's nothing that, no nukes that I have planned for you. This is just pretty much stuff that's already surrounding the space. And
Yeah.
if there's anything that you would like to discuss, in a future video, or whatever the case is, we can put it off. So
Yeah. Sure.
this is geared to be a very friendly, roundtable discussion. So why don't we start with and please introduce yourself to any newcomers, myself, and the viewers.
Sure. So my name's Matt Hamilton, and a quick very quick intro and sort of background myself. I'm a software developer by trade. I actually currently work for IBM, but my interest in crypto has preceded that, and actually not related to my day job at IBM at all. So none of this is anything to do with their view on anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into, I like I said, I'm a software developer. I did a master's in engineering in computer science 20 odd years ago. I ran a web development business here in the UK for about 15 years. I then worked for a startup in the US, making a health and fitness and nutrition tracking app for about 3 years.
Uh-huh.
And sort of towards the end of that, a former colleague of mine gave me some XRP and said, "Hey, have a look at this. It might not be worth anything, but who knows? Hold on to it. Maybe it will be."
Uh-huh.
And I started playing around with it, and I was actually looking to kind of hone my skills. And I started as a kind of just really a learning exercise, writing a trading bot to see whether I could write something that could algorithmically trade. I knew nothing about trading. I dabbled in. I'd looked at cryptocurrencies kind of early on. I mean, I used to do all the like SETI at home, folding at home, distributed computing stuff. That was like 20 years ago. And when Bitcoin came around, I kind of thought, okay, well, that's interesting, but that's just, that's nobody's using it. It's a bit of a waste, really, and kind of ignored it at first.
Mm-hmm.
And then this colleague of mine started mining Bitcoin in the office for a while, and then as a thank you for letting him do that, he gave me some XRP. So I then started playing around with this idea of sort of algorithmic trading. And that was kind of this rabbit hole I went down into and started learning a lot more about XRP. Went and did a fintech course at Oxford University, started to develop a proof of concept for what would be a business to allow people to transfer from UK bank accounts directly into XRP. And you could use a standard UK bank account and hit send, and 10 seconds later you'd have XRP in your wallet.
So you literally are spearheading Ripple. You're pushing. You're trying to bring Ripple as far forward as you possibly can on a technical software level.
I'm using I'm using XRP. Let's set some terminology here, just to be clear with everybody here. So in this interview, when I'm talking about stuff, if I'm talking about XRP, I'm talking about the cryptocurrency. If I talk about XRP Ledger, I'm talking about the blockchain that XRP lives on. And if I talk about Ripple, I'm talking about the software company Ripple that use XRP and build payment systems on top of that. So I've got no connection to Ripple at all. I think they're a great company. I think they're doing some good stuff. I've lived around the world. I lived in the Far East for a while. I've lived in the US. I've run a small business that's had to transfer money about internationally. I've had to pay contractors internationally. Moving money around the world sucks, right? And anything that makes that better is good. And we can delve into this more sort of later on in this, but so that's kind of Ripple. My main interest is in XRP itself, in the cryptocurrency itself, in the wider context of what it can do.
So let me ask you this real quick. You're like, essentially, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, as everyone knows. You're like a Ripple maximalist? Are you a multi-coiner? Are you Ripple's the best thing that you know of right now, and you're willing to move to the next? Like where do you stand on that?
I think that XRP is looking at the environment at the moment. I think XRP has probably the most potential out of the cryptocurrencies, beyond some of like the small niche ones that are aiming to do something very specific. So you've got the security token type things like Nexo that are used directly as an ICO to fund a fintech platform for doing loans and that kind of thing. But in terms of general cryptocurrency that you can use to make payments, to transfer money around, that kind of thing, I think XRP's got the most going for it, I think.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say I'm a maximalist. I just think it has the best chance of success. Right?
So you're not necessarily a maximalist, you're not necessarily a multi-coiner, but you're definitely, your eggs are in Ripple's basket, so to say.
My eggs are certainly in Ripple's basket. Well, XRP's basket, yeah.
XRP's basket. Okay, so this is going to be, you're educating me here. I want to be, your job is to look at me as a Bitcoin maximalist who's approaching this interview as a very neutral individual, and essentially what I would like is to start hitting the various little technical parts of Ripple. I want to start with the simple things that maybe a number of people in the community already know about, such as XRapid and XCurrent. Now, is there, can you briefly discuss XCurrent and XRapid? Are they the same? Are they different?
Yeah. Okay, let's start there then. So again, this is talking about products specifically made by Ripple. So as I mentioned, XRP is a open source, distributed, decentralized ledger, a bit like the Bitcoin blockchain, right? And anybody can use it. And Ripple are a fintech company that are associated with XRP, and that they've done a lot of development on the software. They hold a lot of XRP, and they have been doing a lot of the general promotion of XRP worldwide. They are a fintech company. They're a payments company, right? They're not a blockchain company. They're a payments company. And their goal is to enable the movement of money worldwide. Right now, there's Brad Garlinghouse. He's kind of quite famous for saying that at the moment, the quickest way, if I want to get some money from here to Australia, is literally to get a suitcase full of cash and get on a plane and fly there. Right, and that's just ridiculous in the 21st century. That is literally the fastest way to get money, over to across the world. So, the whole financial infrastructure at the moment just hasn't kept up with the technological infrastructure. We're here, and disregarding the technical problems we had at the start, we're live streaming, video, whatever, 4,000 miles between, and New York, and that's not a problem. We can do this stuff, right? But we can't make payments in the same way. At least the general population can't, right? Now I can send you some Bitcoin or some XRP. Okay, that's fine. You and I are very much exceptional in terms of we know this stuff. We are just a tiny fraction of the population, right? But the average person, they do a transfer in their bank and it takes a long time. So Ripple are trying to kind of solve that problem of moving money worldwide, because this affects everybody. And one of the unfortunate things is it affects those with the least amount of money the most, right? If you're unbanked, or you're in a developing country and you don't have such sophisticated banking facilities, or banking facilities available to you, then you need to go to a Western Union or somebody like that and send some money back home. If you're trying to send whatever $20 back home from Thailand to India, say, and they charge you $5 to do that, you're losing a quarter just in fees, right?
So basically, we're in agreement that from a smartphone, in the middle of nowhere, whether you're using right now, Bitcoin or XRP, you can immediately transfer wealth from one party to another. The argument on Bitcoin could possibly be that it would take a little longer. XRP would be much faster and arguably cheaper in certain instances. We agree right there, right?
Yeah, we agree there. Now, what Ripple are trying to do is extend that further and say, okay, yeah, we could do that with XRP, right? I could, or Bitcoin, right? I could buy some Bitcoin now, or have some Bitcoin in my wallet and send it to you, or some XRP, some Ethereum, whatever, send it to you, and you get some value, right? You can then cash that out, keep it, whatever you want to do. But taking that a step further, most people don't have cryptocurrencies. They've got fiat money either in their hands or in their bank accounts, right?
Correct.
And so they need to take that money. They need to go onto an exchange. They need to go through the KYC bullshit on the exchange and money from one side to another. The other person has to do the same, right? Why can't it just be as easy as on my phone, I hit a button and it goes directly from my bank account to your bank account, right?
So does Ripple provide that right now in something that essentially, you know, and I agree. I like in this crypto space, the whole purpose is to try to eliminate, well, one of the main like points is to try to eliminate identity from a transaction, right? Personal identity from a transaction. So is there a gateway for Ripple to do that right now? We you know, is there an app or something like that that you're aware of, or is everything AML KYC compliant, you know, entry?
Everything is AML KYC compliant. So
Okay.
Ripple approaches, they are working with regulators, right?
Uh-huh.
The sort of Bitcoin has the slightly more anarchistic view, for want of a better way of describing it, more anarchistic libertarian view of, you know, government bad, KYC bad. We should be able to interact, and nobody should be able to know. That's fine. That is perfectly legitimate view. However, in the wider world, that's just not possible. That's just not gonna fly for the majority of people in the majority of countries and the majority of ways in which they work. I mean, not even just for individuals, but if you think companies trying to transfer money between each other, right? They're gonna have a, you know, the sort of corporate equivalent of, you know, KYC that they're gonna need to go through for that kind of thing. So what Ripple's approach is rather, if you think of Bitcoin's approach as being, or well, again, Bitcoin's approach, people have different views as to what Bitcoin should be and how they should use it, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the common views in Bitcoin is that it should be, you know, it's anti-bank. It is get rid of the banking industry, get rid of the financial industry, and do stuff peer-to-peer with nobody in between, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, actually, Ripple, if you go right back in the history of Ripple, before Ripple, the corporation we know at the moment, was founded, there was original Ripple project started by a guy called Ryan Fugger, I never know how to pronounce his name, that, you know, predated Bitcoin. And that Ripple project, its slogan was "Be your own banker," right?
Uh-huh.
And it allowed direct peer-to-peer transfer, but it wasn't transferring of an actual asset; it was transferring a liability. So if I owe you some money and you owe somebody else some money and somebody else owes somebody else some money, it would work out, and the payment, the liability would move from me to you to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it would sort it all out. And that process was called rippling. That was the idea behind it. That's where the name comes from. So
Okay.
you're rippling this debt, this liability between people.
So before it was doing anything in the blockchain space, it was in the payment space.
Exactly. And then Jed McCaleb came up with this idea of, well, could we create a way of doing payments once Bitcoin came around, a way of doing payments like Bitcoin, but without needing proof of work, because he saw proof of work as being potentially, you know, wasteful of energy and long-term not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So his view was, can we build this thing? And he came up with this idea, and he approached a few others, David Schwartz, Arthur Brito, and asked them to say, okay, can you build this? Can you make this thing fly? And that's what they built, right? That's what is the XRP ledger that we know today with the token on it, because the original Ripple didn't have any kind of token, and the token they now have on it is XRP. It was originally called XNS and then was renamed XRP shortly after, but XRP for the last, whatever, 6-7 years. And so that's the XRP ledger. And then what Ripple are trying to build on top of that is the next layer on top that integrates with the rest of the financial industry, because the Bitcoin approach is very much creating silos. It's very much, okay, let's create a completely separate parallel system to the existing financial, you know, system. That's great, but it's going to exclude so many people. It's going to be very difficult to use in terms of, you know, people have their money in, you know, various bank accounts, or they have their cash in their hand or whatever. How do we get them involved in these financial services? And so Ripple are building a set of products, some of which use XRP in order to do that. Mm-hmm. So the three main products they've got, XCurrent, XRapid, and XVia, kind of combined together to be able to do that in various ways. So very briefly, XCurrent is a payment messaging system. So it's similar to what you have at the moment for international payments called SWIFT. And it means that one bank can say, okay, pay this £500 sterling from my bank account to your bank account in the US in US dollars, right? And it will tell your bank that there's this payment coming in. And that's what Xcurrent does. That's what Swift does. It doesn't actually settle the application.
Yeah, let me jump in there for 1 second. So as a Bitcoin maximalist, I just wanted to say I hear you, and what you're saying is, in this particular case with Xcurrent, it is moving money, sovereign-backed money between two parties, and it uses an intermediary of XRP on Xcurrent.
No. Xcurrent generally doesn't use XRP. It can do.
Okay.
But it generally doesn't. Xcurrent is a way of sending just the payment information, right? Similar to Swift, right? Swift doesn't
just the payment information. So this, it's like you're sending me, $1 equivalent, $1 US equivalent from your, 4,000 mile away distance to my distance. And Xcurrent is essentially just the platform through which the communication is spoken.
Exactly. And at the end of that transaction, right, in doing that, now my bank owes your bank some money, right? Because it's sent that payment over. It at some point needs to actually settle that payment. Now, the traditional way in which that's done has been done with what's called Nostro and Vostro accounts. And what that means is that my bank will actually hold a bank account at your bank and will hold some funds on its behalf there. And so what it'll do is it'll transfer some of that money. If I pay you and you're intended to receive whatever, $50, then it'll transfer $50 from the bank account, from Lloyd's bank account UK, that's held with whatever, Bank of America, whatever you've got, into your bank account, right? And so that's fine, but that requires our two banks to have set up those bank accounts and to effectively pre-funded the money there, right? My bank has to have put the money in your bank somehow, has to have transferred that in some form ahead of time, right? So XRapid is a system for what's called on-demand liquidity. So XRapid is the one that as well as doing the payment message would go through Xcurrent. XRapid allows the bank to take my pound sterling, buy XRP here in the UK, send the XRP to the US, and then sell the XRP at the far end, so that you can then, and send it to you as US dollars. So all it is automating the process. I could do this with you right now with Bitcoin, right? I could go onto whatever, I could go into like my Wirex account or Coinbase or whatever, and I could say, okay, buy me, $50 worth of Bitcoin, right? With pound sterling, buy me whatever pound sterling of Bitcoin. I could then put in your address, send you the Bitcoin. You could receive that in your Bitcoin wallet. You could then send that to whatever account at your end, whichever exchange you use, and say, okay, convert that back to US dollars, so that I can now buy my lunch with it or whatever, right?
Okay. And which platform are we talking about still?
This is XRapid.
Okay.
Right. So all XRapid does is automate that process. It buys the XRP at one end, sends it, and sells it. It could be Bitcoin, right? And they did actually trial it with Bitcoin early on, but the problem was Bitcoin was too slow and expensive to do so. So
in defense of XRP here, XRapid is not very volatile, because if all it's doing is immediately buying XRP, you're sending me $1, or 20 of your dollars to 20 of my dollars. Yep. All it's doing is it's buying XRP at your value, immediately transferring it, and then I'm able to withdraw my fiat. There is, and to your point being, there is no volatility involved in that transaction. Price volatility is a null argument in that scenario.
Exactly, because it takes 3 seconds for that transfer to happen between the account. Right? There's a bit of time at each end for the local payment rails or whatever, but overall, say this thing takes a minute. Right.
I mean, 3 seconds. Obviously on a bad day, in crypto, we both know that price can move, right? But I would say, that changes things. It's quite a bit less volatile than face value would have a maximalist belief. So that's certainly educational to me. And
exactly. Compare it to the current situation of if I were to send you, okay, from UK to US is fairly quick, right? and I could probably, with my bank, probably send you a payment, and I don't know, it might get there quite quickly, right? But if you're doing a slightly more, esoteric, exotic corridor, so you're trying to send Brazilian real from Brazil to pay an invoice in Thailand in Thai baht, right? Now, that's likely to take, a good, 4 days at least to go through. So what's the volatility of the fiat market in 4 days, right? Hey, I'm in the UK. We're just potentially about to leave the EU, right? Our no idea what our currency is going to do. It could go.
I'll agree. Yeah, I mean, currency markets. Banks have recently been accused of manipulating them. So anything can happen. I agree across multiple different asset classes.
And not only that, if you're trying to send, in the example I just gave, from Brazilian real to Thai baht, if you did your bank at the moment, the chances are they wouldn't have a direct relationship. So they have what's called the correspondent banking system. So likely what would happen is the Thai baht would be changed, would be sent from one bank to a bigger bank. That might send it, say, to a US bank that would hold US dollars. The US dollars might get then sent to Thailand. The Thai bank would then, send the US dollars. So it might go multiple hops, and each one of those correspondents takes a fee. So like my bank account says, well, we're not going to charge you a fee, but there might be correspondent fees. And I know that if I make a $200 transaction, there's a $15 fee that's put on by the intermediary.
Almost like a hidden fee is what you're saying.
Exactly. It's a hidden fee. And the idea behind XRapid and using XRP is to try and eliminate that correspondent banking system, right?
Okay.
And that correspondent banking system, so and SWIFT in the middle, has been used effectively as an economic weapon. So you've no doubt heard conversations about sanctions against Russia and SWIFT and and all this lot. Well, if you can move away from that, then you can remove like the power that a lot of these banking consortiums, cartels, if you want, have, because you can go direct from one to another. Yeah. So there's a common misconception. A lot of people think that if you're supporting XRP or you're supporting Ripple, then from a lot of crypto people's point of view, you're bad because you're supporting the banks, right? And they think that Ripple are supporting the banks. Well, the biggest problem with that is that banks is not a homogenous term, right? There's all sorts of banks, right? If you're a local business and you want to borrow some money to start your business, or you want to buy a house, your local bank is probably, you might think quite well of them. If you want to get an auto loan or whatever, and you get it from a loans company, then you like them because they're going to allow you to do something you couldn't do. Now there's other ways, and there's crypto ways now coming out of doing that, but you might like them. Now you might not like the guys in Wall Street in suits and doing subprime mortgage loans and all that kind of crap, right?
Of course.
But saying banks covers such a whole range. And so, saying that if you're supporting Ripple, you're supporting the banks, I think is a bit of a simplistic view, because actually, in some regards, what Ripple are doing is they're disintermediating a lot of the banking industry. Because, if you're a large company, if you're someone like Amazon, right, and you've got sub organizations in different countries, you're going to have an entire department dealing with corporate treasury, right? Amazon no doubt hire hundreds of people just dealing with their internal money flow between their different departments and businesses and countries and all this lot, right? So they no doubt have to use a network of banks in order to do that. Now, if Amazon could do that directly, say, without having to use the banks and the banking fees and the slow transfer times and all that lot, that's beneficial to Amazon. So, in some ways, Ripple could actually be removing a lot of the control that banks have and giving it back to the end users, and also creating a more level playing field in that anybody can use the XRP ledger. So if you want to set up a money business transferring money, you could do. I mean, okay, there's local laws that you may have to deal with, but regardless, there's not, a big international banking cartel saying, well, you can't do this because you're not a member.
So let me just, quickly try to turn this last bit of information into 5 minutes. Xcurrent is more of like a messaging style of transfer of money. XRapid is a use case for XRP that specifically uses Bank A and Bank B, right? That's XRapid is for institutions. I'm sorry. Is that correct? It's XRapid is more targeted for banking.
Yeah, it's more targeted
Okay,
banking.
and then
It's
and
exchange
then
end. Yeah.
and then XRP ledger alone, XRP the asset is P2P.
Yeah.
Okay, and
So XRP ledger are just like Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain, right?
understood.
There's nothing special about them. There's nothing inherently bank related with XRP. You know, XRP when they created it, the original people created it, they didn't have a view that it was going to be used with banks, right? They created this thing and then said, okay, well, what would be a good what this thing's pretty cool. What could we use it for?
Mm-hmm.
And so the original founders of the XRP ledger, they built this thing, thought this is pretty cool. What do we do? And then they founded a company called Ripple to then commercialize that, looking towards doing the international remittances, right? But there's nothing inherently, bank related with XRP itself, right?
Okay, understood. So we've touched base on some of the basic, applications of XRP in the real world, which is what a lot of people I think agree with, and why there's so much support for XRP. We have a financial involvement, and we have a completely separate peer-to-peer involvement. And is there any sort of identity, one of the criticisms of XRP or Ripple or, I guess both at this point. One of the discussions was the implementation of user verification. Is that a reality for any part of this other than XRapid, which deals specifically with identity transacting through banks?
Exactly. You're right there. There's nothing to do with identity on the XRP ledger, right? All the XRP ledger knows about is you've got a public address, which looks very much like a Bitcoin address.
So it's essentially Bitcoin in a way on that in that corner.
Yeah. If I send a transaction to you, all I need is your XRP, ledger address, and I send it to you, and you just see something come from my XRP ledger address. There's nothing personally identifiable about those two things. In the same way, there's nothing personally identifiable about Bitcoin addresses.
Correct.
However, of course, they can be tied by analyzing user patterns, user data, what you did with
analysis.
Exactly. It could then be mined. It's a public blockchain, right?
Now, is Chainalysis going to have equal power on the Bitcoin blockchain and the XRP ledger?
So the XRP ledger, one of the differences with the XRP ledger is that it stores actual account balances rather than, it doesn't do so Bitcoin uses the like triple entry momentum accounting kind of principle of it stores the transactions of where the money goes. It doesn't store how much you have in your account. It stores you made this transaction and this money moved from here to here. The XRP ledger stores the actual transaction balances. So, account balances. So you can look on the XRP ledger and say, okay, here's an address. What is its balance? So you might say it's slightly easier to do analysis on the basis of you don't have to kind of do the step of sort of, computing all the different transactions that a address on Bitcoin has made to establish how much they actually have. But
so
obviously,
is this a good or a bad thing to you? I mean, just overall.
I think it's irrelevant because
and neutral. Okay.
It's computing power. It's easy to do these things, right? It doesn't stop anybody to kind of process these things. So, and yeah, so there's no specific AML or KYC thing at all with XRP or the XRP ledger. Just in the same way there's not with Bitcoin or the Bitcoin blockchain. Now,
essentially, there's a way to go off the grid, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Now, if you were to use, so like Blockstream have the Liquid protocol, and Liquid is whatever sidechain thing intended to connect, say, two exchanges together, right? So you can rapidly transfer from Bitstamp to Kraken or whatever, right? And it uses a separate sidechain to do that. Now, it might be that I don't know the full details of it, but obviously one of those exchanges has KYC details. The other exchange has KYC details. It might be, I don't know, but the Liquid would enable that information to be passed along as well as an additional service above and beyond what the Bitcoin blockchain gives you. And that's what XRapid and Xcurrent would do. They would allow the banks to send the KYC information that they legally have to do, but that's totally separate to the actual XRP ledger itself.
So XRP is what we're saying is it's kind of like it wears multiple different hats, and there is a I guess that's the most simple way to put it. It wears different hats. It's not one thing that people could say, yeah, this is the establishment coin. Yeah, it can be in some cases, but Ripple can also be the peer-to-peer currency that Bitcoin currently is.
Right, exactly. So XRP could be whatever you want it to be, right?
All right.
And so say XRP is the bank coin. Well, that's like saying that Bitcoin is the drug coin, right?
Yeah.
It has been used to buy drugs. XRP has been used to do bank transfers, right? So, but does that mean that the Bitcoin's only good for drugs? No, in the same way that XRP is not only good. So, another very good example of XRP usage is in streaming. Now, we didn't have time before the start of this show, but I meant to show you how to set up Coil monetization. And so with Coil, anybody who is a Coil
how long is that going to take? Is that something that we're going to do right now as we speak, or is that something that is not doable?
I don't know. It would probably involve you restarting your browser, so it might not be a smart thing to do in the middle of this.
Okay, yeah. All right, just curious.
It would take a few minutes to do, right? But what it would do is you sign up to Coil, right? And you have to create an account on there. But what that then does is in your account, you can then go in and say, this is my YouTube channel. And anybody who is a Coil subscriber, when they go to your YouTube channel, their browser will instruct Coil to start paying you in XRP live streaming, right? Okay. So it's kind of like Lightning Coins, sort of micropayments with Satoshi. It's a similar kind of thing. It's using payment channels, which are sort of high-speed off-chain sort of channels that the XRP ledger has, to live stream the payment. So every second it is sending, a few drops of the small denomination of XRP. So you have Bitcoin, you have Satoshi, you have XRP drops, right?
Okay, XRP has drops. Real quick, XRP is 1 point and how many decimals, or how many zeros past the decimal?
6. So it's 1 million.
So divisible by 100,000 parts, is that?
1 million.
1 million parts. All right. So all right, cool. I don't know how fast you want to move from topic to topic. How are you feeling about this right now?
I'm feeling good.
Okay. I'm definitely feeling like we're establishing a nice foundation, a factual foundation of what Ripple is, the services that it currently offers, not speculative, technology, right? Current, XRapid are functioning technologies that are being used by, as I believe on Twitter, his handle is @Leonidas, created an image, right? So that's functioning tech.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in order for XRapid to work, does there need to be liquidity in a separate pool than the XRP ledger?
No, not in a not in a separate pool. What happens, because XRapid uses exchanges at each end?
Okay.
Liquidity in those exchanges.
So it's not, the burden is on them essentially. If they're participating, they require the liquidity in order to sell goods or services or to provide that the transacting ability between two parties.
Exactly. I couldn't go onto Bitstamp now and buy $1 million worth of XRP or Bitcoin for that matter. I don't think I could go onto Bitstamp now and buy $1 million worth of Bitcoin in one transaction without severely affecting the price, right?
Correct.
And that's a problem. So you're not going to be able to do a transaction of that size on XRapid at the moment. You can, though, easily do transactions of, say, a few $1,000s on it, and that is, and you could do that repeatedly, and that is kind of where the value comes, because you don't have to kind of batch transactions up and do the settlement, once a day or once a week. It's happening live as it's going along. So it's buying and selling XRP at each end live. But in order for XRapid to work, yes, you do need an exchange in the destination country with suitable liquidity. And that has been probably the reason why XRapid has had slower adoption than people have wanted, because it's kind of this chicken and egg scenario of, you need the liquidity on exchanges, well, you need people using the exchanges. So you kind of need like the small transactions in XRapid to slowly build up. And then you get the larger liquidity there. market makers and that in the
To
area.
me, like what I hear is the burden of volatility is on the bag holder participating in XRapid. The burden of volatility is not on the sender and receiver.
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
So would that be like the most institutionally, obstacle, to cross? Like if an institution wants to have 1 million XRP sitting in a bag, and participate in an XRapid process, they are kind of carrying probably a little more weight than they'd want to. But I
Yeah.
mean, and again, this is a very objective. I'm not trying to smash anything here. I'm just pointing out,
Yeah. No, you're correct. You're correct there,
Okay.
right? But I mean, one of the interesting things about XRapid, and partly the reason it was developed, was that with XRapid, the banks at each end themselves do not need to hold XRP because they basically buy it on demand from the exchange
Okay.
and the transaction goes through.
Interesting.
So that, like you said, the demand is it's on the exchanges, and there will be market makers. So I run, like I said, the bot that I wrote with the XRP is a market maker bot. It's sitting there on the XRP ledger, buying and selling, and it buys US dollars, euros, Japanese won, Japanese yen, Chinese yuan, continuously on the XRP ledger. And so, the market makers like myself, we're just small fry, but we add up, right? Anybody who's willing to buy and sell on an exchange, anybody who's got a limit order on an exchange is potentially going to be part of this, and not even really know it. You could be, have a limit order on whatever one of the exchanges and be a part of an XRapid transaction and not even know it, right?
Okay. So you would essentially profit if an exchange in order to participate in XRapid, an exchange would potentially market buy XRP. Your order would get filled,
Yeah.
if you were selling,
Yeah.
and you would take a profit while someone would be sending point A to point B. And then what would happen with the XRP after it was used as this medium of exchange?
So it's then sold at the other end, or the other exchange, should then be sat on the other exchange, and then obviously
Interesting.
could be used to
So
then back again.
Bittrex could buy it, and then Binance could sell it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And then it might be used to go back the other direction, or you might have the traditional sort of arbitrage, of people buying at one end, because if you have the flows going, very much in one direction, then you end up putting pressure on one side, and the price would drop down, and then arbitrage would buy at the lower price, sell at the higher price, and that would effectively return it back to the start again.
So there is a great benefit to this being a two-way street.
Yeah.
Like otherwise there'll be instances similar to what was known as the kimchi premium, where Bitcoin was trading at like,
Yeah.
20 plus K on Korean exchanges
Yeah.
versus okay.
Yeah, there was the kimchi premium on XRP as well. XRP was really in Korea, and when what was it? CoinMarketCap removed the Korean exchanges, that hit XRP.
Yeah. Well, when that was what, early 2018, I think, when they had to do that.
Yeah, and that hit XRP really badly. That because there was a lot of Korean.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but also, I mean, again, the kind of the good thing with this is you get these network effects in that, while the XRP ends up at one place, it doesn't have to go back to where it came from, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can then be sent to a different exchange somewhere else. So, you can have this whole network, and the XRP is flowing backwards and forwards between all different places. And the idea being is that the financial institutions don't need to have pre-funded accounts and be holding money at each other account. So the previous example I gave you, in which if my bank has an account with your bank and has some US dollars there, then my bank has a liability for US dollars, right? So if the US dollar suddenly drops down because Trump says something stupid and the price drops down, or vice versa, our country decides to drop out of the EU and our price drops and it goes the other way, the banks have volatility risk themselves because they are holding an amount of currency in the other country, whereas with XRP they wouldn't need to do that because it's bought and sold dynamically.
Yeah. All right, so let's kind of touch a couple things. Now, someone wanted to, I don't know, I didn't want it to, I wanted to have a little bit of a different flow. I'm taking a quick look at the comments Just a real quick look here, if you can bear with me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of them, a lot more than I was expecting here. So, I mean, people wanted to. One point that I wanted to get to closer to the end of our discussion was going to be the pre-mine, but this was brought up and asked in the comments here. So I feel like we should hit it while there are people curious about it.
Sure.
Now we're going. So we've just gone through a very educational portion of this discussion, right? Now we're like, let's just dip our toes in the waters of a debatable topic, and then we can kind of move back to some of the other topics that we are going to discuss, like consensus amendments, and other things that are less debatable. But quickly, I'm going to explain my position briefly as a Bitcoin maximalist. And again, this is a neutral debate, but I'm just going to explain my position as a Bitcoin maximalist, what a pre-mine tells me. A pre-mine tells me it is a 100% unchangeable signature of centralization. If an entity has 100% pre-mined, or actually not even 100%, to me, if a company pre-mines the token, it is a mark of centralization that cannot be washed away. Now, Ripple pre-mined its entire supply, and it distributed 80% to Ripple Labs. 20% landed in the laps of the founders. There were 3 individuals that received that 20% cut, and Ripple, the company, received 80%, 80 billion, right? 20 billion to the founders, 80 billion to the company Ripple. And Ripple's been doing numerous things to promote its cryptocurrency and sell it in OTC, or to sell it without affecting exchanges except for Jed McCaleb. So what, to me, I cannot turn my head away from a pre-mine. Now, I'm asking you to justify a pre-mine. What does that mean to you?
Sure. So, okay, so there's various sort of aspects to this. The first one that I'm going to bring up, actually, because it was brought up last night. I saw your interview with Kevin Pham last night, which is a great interview. I've interacted him before on Twitter, and I think I have a very different opinion of him after seeing your interview than I have previously.
Same actually.
One of the things that he said, and sort of paraphrasing him, I can't remember his exact wording, so hopefully I get the gist of this right. But he was saying that when he sees like Bitmain, I think it was his example, doing so well and having all this money, then what it basically is it's him sort of covering up for his own sort of, I think he said sort of insecurities, or that he himself didn't start $1 billion company.
Like,
right?
People hate winners was his.
People hate winners. That's what he was saying. That people hate winners. Right now, there's a lot of sentiment, I think, of that kind of affects and sort of puts a sort of view on Ripple and the XRP that they hold, and this notion of a pre-mine, right? Because, and the reason I say this is that, okay, so you're saying, okay, it's centralized and they created all this XRP. Well, so what? You could do the same. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from doing the same. You could go and create 100 billion,
Joe coin,
and you could sell them, right? There's absolutely nothing stopping you. Unlike, say, whatever, gold or oil, we're not dependent upon having to randomly be born onto a particular geographic rock and, happen to have, natural resources under our feet that we can take advantage of that somebody else can't, right? This is code. This is just bits. Anybody could do this, right? So I think it's a little, when a lot of times when people sort of say, well, it's unfair that Ripple have this. I'm not sure if that's quite your view. I think your view is a lot more ideological than that. But I know that some people kind of like, it's unfair that Ripple have all this. Why should they have all of this? It's not a, Bitcoin was a fair means of distribution. XRP is not a fair means of distribution.
Yeah, for the record, I don't care about distribution of wealth. I believe in 100% free market activity. That includes intervention from any state parties, any sovereign entities. I believe in free markets 100%.
So XRP is 100% free market, right?
Well,
because the creators were 100% free to create that, and they defined the rule the same way that Satoshi did, in that Satoshi created Bitcoin, and there was nothing that stopped them. It was 100% free market, and they defined the rules. So they defined it is going to be distributed according to this set of rules, right? And XRP was like, we're going to distribute it according to this different set of rules. And that was entirely the decision of Satoshi Nakamoto or the founders of the XRP ledger, right? Now, they created it. It's entirely up to them what they do with it, right?
Agreed.
Now, you could say that from a sort of a wider philosophical point of view or whatever, that the Bitcoin is a fairer system because it allows anybody to participate to then gain XRP, right? But the reality is very different, right? Satoshi didn't envisage ASICs coming along, didn't envisage mining pools being created.
So
right?
some would argue that he, just for the sake of this, and Kevin did say that he did argue the point that Satoshi did envision data center mining in the white paper.
Data centers were mentioned in that, but I don't think to anywhere near the scale of what the reality is now, right? Now, I can't mine Bitcoin, right? I can't economically. Well, I can, but I would mine it at a loss.
Yeah,
right?
Of course. Yeah.
There's no economic reason for me to mine it versus buy it, right?
Well, the same criticism in a way can be said of Ripple, right? Of XRP.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And that's my point, right? Is that the reality is to 99.9% of people, they're going to go and they're going to buy it, right? If you say to Bitcoin to somebody, oh yeah, I bought some of that on Coinbase, right, or whatever, like 0.1% of people said, oh yeah, I mined it, right? And that is becoming less and less possible because the hash power needed, the equipment you need. I mean, I've got a Blockeruptor cube, right? And I can't plug that in now on mine. Even that's an ASIC, but that's still not that's not economical. I worked it out the other day just to see whether it's worth plugging it back in again, and it's not, right?
Quickly, did we leave the topic, or are you trying to tie a couple things together?
Okay, so maybe I've meandered a bit, but the point that I'm trying to say is there's no fair system. There's no true fair system, right? So I think that Ripple owning a large amount of XRP, now bearing in mind when they were given that XRP by the founders, it was worth virtually nothing, right?
I understand that that is an argument, but
you go create your own and it would worth nothing too, right? It's what you then go and do with it, right? Satoshi could have created Bitcoin and it could be worth nothing because nobody deemed it worthwhile, right? And for a long time,
it was bootstrapped it was a brand new technology without any funding, right? It was created as a direct attack on the illegal banking activity that caused the 2008 financial collapse, right? So the Bitcoin was almost like a FU to the institutional, financial sector, right? XRP, my one thing I would say is yes, it is what obviously if the technology was worthless and garbage, then it would have gone straight to zero like numerous other altcoins, right? Now it did enter a space that was maturing, so I don't give Ripple as much credit as I would give something like Bitcoin, because Bitcoin was the first.
Maturing, but not mature. Think about it. Ripple,
agreed. 2013, according to FinCEN's, which I have up behind me, I was reading through the FinCEN documents. Ripple alleges it was a company as of 2013.
Right. So XRP was released when Bitcoin was still worth nothing, really. Compared to now, right?
Relative to now, absolutely.
Relative to now, yeah. So I think saying that XRP was launched into an established market or mature market or whatever word you used, I think.
No, I wouldn't say immature. I said an immature market. It was, it's still an immature market space. 10 years in, right? So I agree. I'm just saying that I don't think Ripple. I give it credit in the sense that it's not worth zero like numerous other coins. But I also I hear the argument that yes, Ripple, if it did absolutely nothing, it would be worth zero. And currently it's it entered a space. It didn't necessarily create the space. So that would be my only thing to say. But but quickly back onto pre-mine. You're saying, so just to clarify, to you it's just a different set of rules, right?
Yep.
Bitcoin's instead of pre-mining, they created a distribution plan with over time that through mining block rewards and halvenings, and Ripple did a full pre-mine, um, and that to you, there's no centralizing element that says to you, like there's no part of a pre-mine that has a tag of centralization in it.
No, it doesn't, because to me, centralization is about control. Centralization to me
Well,
is
it
about
does control, right? Instead of handing custody to a mathematical distribution as part of the protocol, what it did was it gave the entire market supply to, as we established, 80% to Ripple Labs and 20% to the founders.
by
Now,
control. By control, I mean me sending you money, right? There's nothing that Ripple can do to prevent me to send you money, right? There's nothing that Ripple can do to take my XRP away from me, right?
okay, so you're saying Ripple is essentially censorship resistant. There's nothing Ripple. If you own Ripple, Ripple cannot take your Ripple. They can't enter some sort of code and just extract your Ripple and pull it out and say you're not allowed to spend Ripple on XYZ products.
Exactly. XRP, not Ripple. Remember?
XRP.
So they can't take my XRP away from me. They can't prevent me from sending XRP to you. So centralization for me is about, if something is centralized, for me, the litmus test as to whether or not something is centralized is there somebody that can prevent me from doing what I want to do? And there's nothing in the XRP ledger that can prevent me from doing what I want to do. You control that to something like, PayPal, which is very centralized. I mean, I ran a conference in 2010. I ran a conference here in the UK. We had 300 people from 30 different countries. We sold a bunch of tickets. We're just about to start paying for the hotel and the catering, and suddenly we sold the tickets via PayPal. PayPal suddenly frees £70,000 and say, well, this money's come from 30 different countries. It must be fraudulent, right?
Well, of course.
And they say, well, have you got any goods to send out? I said, no, it's a conference. And they said, well, how do we know? I said, because there's a conference website. They're like, well, it could be fraudulent. And they sat on that for 3 months. So we had to find alternate funding to bankroll the payment of the hotel, the catering, the venue, the videographer, all that kind of stuff, because PayPal froze the money. Now, with XRP, that could not happen. Same with Bitcoin, right? XRP is the same in that manner. And that's the key thing in my mind about centralization, right? It doesn't matter how much XRP Ripple hold. They cannot prevent me from doing what I want to do with my XRP.
So that's the metric of centralization that you're going to stick with. And that is a good point. I will say that is a valid point. I personally, like I said, pre-mine is something that is a big red flag to me. And Ripple might not be doing, for all we know, they could be doing great things with their pre-mine, right? They could be distributing it properly. They could be doing, XYZ beneficial to XRP. Ripple can be.
Actually, that's a very good thing. So with Bitcoin, think about how much money is being extracted from the Bitcoin blockchain.
I'm sorry, it cut out. It said, imagine how much money or something for Bitcoin. Imagine how much what?
Yeah, sorry. Imagine how much money is being extracted Bitcoin ecosystem because of mining, right? That money, where's that money going to? It's going to electricity companies, right?
Correct.
Where it's in power companies. Well, that in the XRP ecosystem, it's not going to power companies, right? If people are buying off of Ripple, it's staying within the ecosystem, and Ripple have been using, the funds that they've been getting to grow the ecosystem. That's why you have somebody from Ripple at every single fintech conference going on, sat on the board, talking to every government who are trying to work out how the hell do we deal with cryptocurrency, and we did it. That's why you have initiatives like Ripple have this thing called Spring, in which they're funding other companies to do fantastic stuff with XRP. They have the University Blockchain Research Initiative, in which they're funding universities to kind of study blockchain and do more sort of teaching and work and research around blockchain, right? Now, all of that is because of the funds that Ripple have because of the XRP that they've been selling. Whereas in Bitcoin, so much of that is going out to the electricity companies and is leaving the ecosystem, right? So yeah, I think there's very much downsides to the way that proof of work works in that regard, and that it is, it requires, I can't remember what the current figure is. What is it, like $6 million a year or something like that? Or a month or a day. I don't know.
For total mining, in US dollar, I'm not sure. But to me, I would say my counter to that would be essentially the same thing as gold, right? If you're mining for gold and you have to buy all this equipment, well, it prevents a concentration of wealth, right? And I think there are good things to Bitcoin being hard money to the point where it costs electricity in order to produce. The argument would be that, well, if miners had 100% free mining abilities, well, they would just keep all the Bitcoin. There would be concentrations, and it would prevent the velocity of Bitcoin from moving hands, right? So
Right.
I think that there is something to mining, mining a Bitcoin versus, and I don't understand 100% Ripple's consensus mechanism, which is one of the things that we wanted to jump into. And I think we've sufficiently established that to you it is not decentralized because of a pre-mine. It is only it is not centralized because of a pre-mine. It's only
Yep.
centralized if Ripple says you are not allowed to spend Ripple or XRP.
Yep, exactly. That's the only thing I care about as an end user is whether or not there's somebody there that can prevent me from doing what I want to do. If I want to go and send you money, if I want to go and fund terrorism, right?
Yeah, buy prostitutes and weed, cocaine, right? Yeah, if someone's stopping you as a censor,
nobody can stop me doing that, right?
Uh-huh.
So yeah, that is probably a sign, of the fact that it is decentralized. The fact that I could go and fund Al Qaeda and nobody would be able to stop me, right?
Uh-huh.
And then people, oh, isn't this a bad thing that people can use it to fund Al Qaeda? And you live by the sword, die by the sword, right? It's one of the things about a decentralized network like Bitcoin is that you can't prevent somebody from using it for what they want to use it for.
Exactly, and I think it is a double-edged sword, but I think you're more likely to do good things with it than bad. Well, in the sample size of people using this, whatever cryptocurrency, the 1.16% or something used for black market transactions, is nothing. And not to mention US dollar is probably the greatest, for terrorists, in preference. So let's move on to, because what we're going to do is we're going to explore this. We're going to end up playing this back. So we've hit a lot of very fundamental Ripple tech. We've hit some XRP stuff. In a very 5 minutes time, can you explain to me why is Ripple and XRP like when I first got into crypto, Ripple the cryptocurrency XRP was known as Ripple. Everyone was calling it Ripple, and it was there was no difference between XRP and Ripple Labs. It was the same, right? And now it's different. And the argument is they're doing that in order to try to create a defense in court where they're fighting a securities fraud allegations against investors. Now, is that something is what's the deal, right? What's the deal with XRP and Ripple? Like, I want your take on that.
Right. So the token itself has always technically been called XRP. Go into GitHub, look all the way back through GitHub, and you'll find it is XRP. Right at the very, very start, it was XNS before it was launched, and then it became XRP, right? But the actual currency itself has been called XRP. Now, Ripple in their early days, at one point, I think called it Ripple Credits for a short period of time. But it's always also been referred to, officially as XRP. That's if you look through the code, it's XRP, right? That's what it's known as. Now, what is confusing is because the word Ripple is used in so many different contexts. As I mentioned, Ripple was a system before Bitcoin even existed, and was a totally different system by this guy called Ryan Fugger, and didn't even have a token, and that was called Ripple, right? And then Ripple, the company, was originally called OpenCoin, New Coin, then OpenCoin, and then renamed themselves to Ripple. Now, if I had my way, and if I had a time machine, I'd go back and say, no, don't rename the company and call it this, something so confusingly related to the currency, right? But hey, I don't have a time machine. But if you think about it, this is a common thing across software, especially, and IT. It says Elasticsearch is a search engine created by a company, created by some individuals that created this thing called Elasticsearch. They then created a company called Elastic to commercialize it. So you've got Elasticsearch and you've got Elastic. Oracle, you've got Oracle, the company, you've got Oracle, the database. Red Hat, you've got Red Hat Enterprise Linux, otherwise known as Red Hat. You've got Red Hat, the company, otherwise known as Red Hat, or soon IBM. But this thing is not an issue. It's an issue that I think people try to make a big deal out of, and I don't really see what the issue is. They've always been distinct. There've been certain people, I think, who have purposefully tried to conflate the two in order to promote some kind of other agenda, right?
Well, yeah, I'll tell you the issue from a maximalist perspective, right? The issue is, well, it was Ripple, right? When I was trading XRP Ripple on exchanges, a long time ago, there was no distinction between the two. But now that there's a securities fraud investigation, Ripple is branching the company essentially into two parts, saying that XRP LLC, XRP LLC company, created and pre-mined all the XRP and then handed it right on over to Ripple Labs or whatever.
Right. Nothing's changed, right? Nothing has actually changed. All it has been is a focus on making the distinction clearer, right? So you said when you started trading, it was known as Ripple, right? You went on to exchange and you Ripple. Yeah, I totally agree. That you go back in time, you look there. Yes, it was called Ripple, and it was quite clear that was the token. But there was also a company called Ripple. And then as it started to grow and started to become, more well known, it started to realize that this was confusing, because Ripple, the company, started to produce products, and they got funding. They were VC funded to the tune of whatever, $80 million, $90 million they got in VC funding through about 5 or 6 different rounds of funding. And it started to especially become an issue that people would purposefully confuse them. So you got people like what's his name? What Bitcoin did? Peter, I can't remember his surname now.
And he can't think of them
continuously, right? He calls it Ripple coin as a dig, right? It's this Bitcoin maximalism kind of joke. We're going to call it Ripple coin. Ha ha ha! Aren't we funny? We're going to call it Ripple coin. Now the problem being is that it just perpetuates this. Now you can go back and look on Bitcoin Talk back, when was it, 2015? There were people being actively paid to post FUD about XRP, right?
Well, just to defend your position, as I was reviewing the FinCEN report, they do establish that there are 2 separate entities, XRP LLC and Ripple Labs. Yep. Now, with that fact on the table, I'm going to agree with you. I do think that it's weird that the two were confused for so long. Usually when I see something like that, I assume it's by design. As a trader, you look at all kinds of things, right? And you're constantly analyzing everything, and you make assumptions. And I assume that there was a purpose, right? You can't just let something ride like that for approximately 4 years, right? It wasn't really until maybe even 2018 that Ripple, mid to late 2018, that Ripple started to distance itself.
But it wasn't Ripple that started that. It was the XRP community that started that. So the XRP community kind of grew in 2018. There was virtually nothing there. There was a few people like Tiff Hayden, that were around in the early days, used to do a lot of Bitcoin promotion, also do a lot of XRP promotion. She created a company called Cashier to build a
Tiffany Hayden.
Yeah. So she was one of the early sort of Bitcoin proponents, early XRP proponents as well. She started a business using XRP like many years ago to try and do retail payments with it, before the industry was really ready for it. And she was pretty much one of the sole voices on Twitter for XRP for a long time, right? And then a few others started to come around, and it grew massively in 2018. But one of the big things that happened was, because this community started to grow, they wanted to make themselves distinct from Ripple, the company, right? So it was the community that said, okay, we need a new logo, right? Because the only logo that anybody uses for XRP is Ripple's logo, because XRP doesn't have a logo, right? So they created, it was the XRP community that pushed to, okay, let's differentiate the two, because we want to support. Some of them don't even like Ripple.
So basically, that was the decision that moved from a fidget spinner symbol to a the fancy X, essentially.
Yeah.
I'm not like I'm not being derogatory here. Just
No, that's fine. The fidget spinner to the fancy X, exactly. So there was a community like initiative to come up with a new logo, and there was like a competition and a vote and whatever to try and come up with a new logo. And so, it was the community that originally pushed it. And I think then Ripple kind of got behind that as well. And they saw the reasoning behind it. Maybe some of that coincide with some of the SEC type stuff, and it would make it clearer. They realized that people had been confusing the two. And so, like I said, nothing's changed apart from trying to make it clearer to people. It's not like suddenly they've split off all of a sudden. They've always been separate, but there's never been a need to distinguish them because people didn't realize it. It's like, okay, so here,
I get it. Well, I definitely want to spend time on a little more valuable topics. But I think we're in agreement, and I think everyone that's watching understands. If anyone disagrees, please comment, and I'll pay attention. Now, I see something about validators now. And that was one of the topics that we wanted to try to touch base. Now, how are you on time? Are we hitting enough stuff? Okay. I just don't want to be insensitive. I understand that you're a number of hours ahead, and I hope the Ripple community thanks you for your time as well, because this is an extremely valuable education. This is an excellent discussion, and I'm very thankful to have you and to have this discussion as well. And I want to make sure that this is very favorable to you, so we can perhaps do this in the future if we don't cover everything.
Yeah, thank you as well.
Okay. Of course. So let's kind of touch base on. Let's start with consensus, and then let's migrate from consensus into validation. And what does that mean? Is there a centralization element in validation? Let's just start with consensus. Run me through. Bitcoin is proof of work, right? Consensus through proof of work. What is Ripple? XRP.
Okay. So yeah, Bitcoin's proof of work, and just to briefly cover this, just to compare and contrast the two, this obviously, but for some of the viewers as well, the way in which proof of work works is they effectively have, very simplifying here, please don't kill me, Bitcoin maximalists, for this oversimplification of the way Bitcoin works. You effectively have a lottery. And every 10 minutes you draw a winner from the lottery. You get to buy lottery tickets, and the more hash power you have, effectively the more lottery tickets you have, and the greater chance you have of winning the lottery every 10 minutes to block and determine which transactions go in that block. Would you agree? Is that a fair?
Well, yeah, we're just we're quick noting. Yeah.
And that requires, in order to you have mining, in which you're effectively using electricity, and as you say, you're using a valuable resource, energy, in order to do that. So that's what's stopping somebody just getting all of the tickets and winning the lottery, right? And getting to choose what goes in the block each time. Consensus takes a different approach. The XRP Ledger Consensus Protocol, what it does is, instead of picking effectively one person to be the leader for every 10 minutes. What happens is you agree, each participant in the network agrees from a group of nodes. So say there's 2,000 nodes on the network.
Okay.
You pick, and some of those nodes will be what are called validators, and we'll cover that later. So say there's 200 validators. You, as a node operator, pick from that 200 a subset of that you are going to use to determine the order in which transactions happen. Because the whole point of this, the whole problem we're trying to solve, is the double spend problem. And that is the case that if I send you $20, I shouldn't be able to send that same $20 to somebody else, right? Once I've spent it, I've spent it. And unless you have a central arbiter like the current banking system has, unless you have a central arbiter, it's very difficult to make sure that I don't send this to you and send it to somebody else at exactly the same time, right? And so with the XRP ledger, what you do is you try and order all of the transactions that happen in an agreed order. So if we know that we can agree, everybody can agree that I first sent the $20 to you, and then I tried to send the same $20 to somebody else, and we can agree that you get the $20 and the second transaction is invalid, right? Because I no longer have that $20 to spend. So what you're trying to do is order the transactions. In Bitcoin, you elect one person every 10 minutes. They get to choose the order. In XRP, you consult a selected group that you choose to come to a consensus on the order. So each one of those in that group says, I believe it's order A or I believe it's order B. And they kind of try and come to a consensus on that. And once 80% is in agreement, then you say, okay, that's the order in which the transactions happen, and everybody agrees that.
Okay, we kind of talked about the UNL, right? That's like a node or whatever picks a series of other nodes, and this is at random, right?
Sort of random. Okay. We'll cover that in a bit, but yeah, sort of random.
Okay.
You pick a set of nodes yourself.
Oh, yourself as an individual. Okay. And this doesn't have to be the same.
As a node operator, you choose it, not as in somebody transacting regularly, but as in somebody who node on the network. Yeah.
So as a node operator, I pick a handful of other nodes that I want to be my, my validators, to say, hey, are we all on the same page?
Yeah, and so that's your jury, effectively, right?
Okay.
That's jury, and you are asking them, okay, come to a consensus on the order of these transactions.
Now it's people that I pick, right? You're saying it's not like the same 10 for every validator. It's every validator has 10 different.
So this is the bit that I said we'd have to come on to, is that you have a certain overlap between everybody's list. You have to have an overlap, because otherwise, if they were completely separate, then you could come to completely separate decisions, right? But what you need is a certain overlap such that overall everybody will come to the same decision, but you only ask a subset. As long as that subset overlaps with another subset, which overlaps with somebody else's subset, then you're going to get the same answer. So it needs to be at least 41% overlapping with everybody else's UNL, right?
Understood.
Now, the interesting thing here being is that all you are trusting the validators to do is to come to a consensus on the order. You don't actually care what the order is, right? You just need to know, just agree which order it is. I don't care what the order is. You just have to agree what the order is, because the only person that cares what the order is somebody who is maliciously trying to do a double spend, right? Because they're the only ones that care whether or not the first transaction or the second transaction goes through. Nobody else cares, because if they're all honest participants, they're only sending one transaction anyway, right? And the network as a whole doesn't care whether the first transaction or the second transaction goes through, because either way, somebody got paid, right? And the integrity has been retained in that money has been spent twice. It's only been spent once. But as the network's concerned, it doesn't care whether the money gets sent from Alice to Bob or Alice to Charlie. It doesn't matter. It just has to go to just one of them and not both of them.
Okay, yeah, understood. So
go ahead.
As
a node operator, all I'm doing is trusting the validators to come to a consensus. I don't actually care whether they are right or wrong. They just have to agree. So the idea being is, I would ideally like the validator, my UNL, to be comprised of entities that would not collude together. So for instance, say I compose my UNL of just randomly picking companies here. These people are not XRP users, but might hopefully illustrate this point. That say I picked Apple, Microsoft, the Linux Foundation, and Amazon, right? Now, I might not trust each of those companies, right? I might decide that, okay, I don't trust Microsoft or I don't trust Amazon, but I can probably trust that Amazon and Apple are not going to collude, or Amazon and Microsoft. You're not going to get all of them together to kind of defraud you, because they're not going to agree to do that. There's no reason for them to do that. And again, the interesting thing being is that the only thing that people can do malicious is to disagree, right? So they can just disagree with a consensus. And if they continually disagree, you could see that, right? If you've got a jury of 12 people and one person continually is saying guilty, whereas everybody else is saying innocent, you can probably say, okay, well, that one person that's saying guilty, there might be some reason to exclude them if everybody else is saying innocent. Now, the analogy slightly breaks down because obviously there's a very big difference between guilty and innocent in the person that's being tried. But this is the point. If you're trying to make a decision, you don't care which way it goes. You just need to make a decision. If somebody keeps disagreeing, you just ignore them. You just take them off the list.
Okay. So that's consensus is met through essentially a web, right? Is that kind of like a spider web in a way where strings kind of have to attach to
it's a Venn diagram, right?
Okay.
It's a Venn diagram of the circles have to overlap, right?
And it's a gigantic Venn diagram. We're not talking about two circles. We're talking about as long as even this circle way over here has a slight overlap on this circle here, and this one is over here, and there's like an interlapping, mesh in between. It doesn't matter what circle you are. You can be anywhere in there. You can choose any 10 nodes as long as there's one overlap. 41%, 41%, right?
41% with the general, the general.
So your circle needs to be 41% in someone else's circle.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've hit that.
So just to possibly take that on to a further point is that how do you choose who's on this list, right? Now you can choose yourself and you can manually do it, or you can subscribe to a list that somebody else has created. Okay. Now this is where there's a bit of confusion because Ripple themselves do publish a list, and a lot of people refer to that as the UNL, and there's a little confusion that they think that is the only one that's there, whereas all that is a suggestion, right? That's a default setting, but that anybody can change. So the UNL on my server is not Ripple's default one, and in fact the UNL on my server doesn't even include any Ripple validators at all, right? So I've chosen my circle to overlap with everybody else except for Ripple, and I did that mainly for academic reasons, just to kind of prove a point to somebody. I've got no reason not to trust Ripple, but that's the point. Is that some people think that because Ripple publish their own UNL, that means that they control the ledger. They don't. Okay. All they do is they have this default, but then anybody can.
So that's a common misconception, is what you're saying. That Ripple, despite having their UNL list, it doesn't necessarily mean everyone needs to adhere to that list. The only thing that needs to happen is that as you're selecting validators, there needs to be a 41% overlap.
Exactly.
Okay. And what gives an individual an incentive to be a validator? I know that you expressed that you're capable of, you're connected to a space that, maybe a lot of people don't fully comprehend and can't do the things that you do. I could go out and buy an ASIC unit or whatever through whichever company, and I can plug my node in with probably a little bit of work. I can get it running, right? Is that a safe assumption with Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Now, what's the equivalent on the side of Ripple XRP, or which should I be talking to?
To XRP, right?
Okay.
Any can create. Well, okay, it's confusing because the actual piece of code, the actual server, is called Ripple D, as in it's a Unix convention that daemons, that the servers have D on the end, and it is the daemon that implements the Ripple protocol, which is the protocol that the XRP ledger uses. But that anybody can set up and run that, right? And it's pretty straightforward. There's even instructions to basically get one up and running in like 15 minutes on DigitalOcean.
Now, is this something that you just run on your laptop, like a Lightning Network node, or is this something that you need to buy hardware for?
You would want to run it on a permanently connected machine to be of use, right?
So you'd want there a Ripple equivalent of an ASIC?
No, there's not, because there's no mining, right? So you don't have an equivalent of an ASIC. A validator could possibly be considered a bit like a Bitcoin full node, potentially.
Okay.
It's not quite the same. But in terms of an incentive, there's no financial incentive to run one. No direct financial incentive. You don't get rewarded like you do in Bitcoin for running it. On the same token, you don't have to expend vast amounts of energy to do it, right? So, I mean, my validator node costs me 15 euros a month, right? Running it on a virtual server in Finland, right? So there's no and for me, that's perfectly acceptable to pay that. And the reason I do is because I run the market making bots that I run network to run against, and also I want a node that I can submit my transactions to, right? So if you have to submit your transactions to a node, then if you run your own node, obviously you have a bit more control over it. You can make sure that you're the one that's using it, nobody else is using it, and whatever. So there's no direct financial reward, but there's a benefit in that anybody who runs a service on the XRP ledger, like an exchange, they're going to probably want to run their own node because they've got a neutrality ledger, right? So it's the same way, like, why would somebody run a DNS server on the internet, right? The reason they run a DNS server is because they want to make DNS queries. And if they have their own DNS server, it's better than using the DNS server on the other side of the planet or whatever, right? And so that's why they would do it. You know, they don't get any financial reward for running a DNS server or an NTP time server or an SMTP mail server. You know, they don't get any reward for it, but it enables them to do stuff like get the time, send email, make DNS queries. So there's no financial incentive. The incentive is basically, it aligns with what you want to do.
Yeah, and I would actually agree with that. I do believe in a thing called altruistic, validating or whatever you'd want to call it. You know, to me, it would be running a ASIC mining unit. If you have, a million people running a single unit, that's the equivalent of one company running a million units. You know, so I do believe that there is an altruistic purpose behind, mining. And here's my little crypto kitty for everyone that, if you wanted some attention. So here she is. But
with Bitcoin, there's no incentive to run a full node, right? There's no incentive to run a full node on Bitcoin. You don't get paid to run a full node.
Well,
you get paid.
that's what I'm saying. It's an altruistic practice. I would run I would run a node. Average Joe here would run a node just so that I can participate in Bitcoin improvement proposals. If I'm part of this ecosystem and I feel like I have an incentive to vote on something, even though my vote is tiny, a million different average Joes doing the same thing equals big fish, right? So
Exactly.
I do believe there's an altruistic element to small fish mining. Okay, and that's essentially a similar concept to mining without incentive in XRP.
Yeah.
You're essentially you're validating because you believe in the XRP ledger and you want it to succeed, therefore you will participate at a loss, and that is an acceptable loss to you because it's what would it be to you, like $10 a month type of thing, or is it expensive? Is it more?
15 euros a month it costs me, right?
So nothing.
Yeah. And the reason I do that is it's not altruistic. Actually, the reason I do it is because I run trading bots.
Well, you're an exception to the rule. I think we're going to both agree that not everyone is running trading bots, and nor can they program them, etc.
No.
But let's just keep it to average Joes. They would be mining 100% or validating at a loss, the same way I would be validating at with a snowball's chance in heck to maybe validate a Bitcoin block on the luckiest day of my life, right? There's really no chance. That's not what I'm mining for. I'm mining because I want a million more of me to have a say in Bitcoin in the event that there is some sort of controversy in a hard fork, right? Or some sort of improvement proposal that needs to be discussed and disputed and whatever, voted on.
Exactly.
So we've hit consensus. It's a overlapping Venn diagram with 40% of the circle needing to overlap. I mean, I know I'm using elementary terms here, but I'm keeping it that way by design. There's the incentive to mine or validate at a loss is to altruistically, in most cases, altruistically uphold the ledger because people believe in Ripple. And obviously it has a very strong support system. Now, is there anything else you wanted to add to like consensus validation? Is there any red flags to you? Like, if we were talking, even if I was talking to someone with Bitcoin, might be a couple things where I would say there's an elephant in the room here. Are there any elephants in the room, in your opinion? And again, this is not me ripping. This is just us having a nice conversation. Is there any elephants in the room to you?
I don't think so. I mean, the one that some people bring up is that because Ripple do publish this default UNL, if they stopped doing that, would everything continue? Right now, I only bring that up because it's never been tried in reality. Right now, it's there's people like myself that don't use that anyway, so we know it works, right? We know we can survive without it, and actually, they only brought that in, publishing, an actual published UNL only about a year ago, and it was statically configured in a configuration file. So, it's something that people bring up. So it's an elephant that people possibly think is there, but I don't think really is. That's one. And some people say, well, if Ripple control that, then they control everything else because there's nobody else to coordinate consensus, and that's just not true, right? It's just we could hang out on a wherever, I hang out somewhere and say, okay, here's an agreed list of validators we're going to start with, or you look at the ledger itself, and the ledger keeps stats, so you can see, okay, which validators are in agreement, and pick a bunch of them and say, okay, that's what we're going to use now. So I don't think that's an issue. So in terms of anything else, I can't think of anything else that's to cover.
Yeah, thank you for being honest. That's very, very positive for our discussion's sake and for the community's sake. Now let's see here. There was one question that I was listening to you intently and I lost my train of thought. I had a question, but I don't have it anymore. So let's see here. We've talked consensus, validation. I guess my question is kind of coming back to me. As far as an average Joe is concerned, an average Joe would use the UNL provided by Ripple. Is configuring your own UNL difficult? Is it difficult-ish? Is it harder than setting up an IKEA, dresser, or is it, does it take?
It's literally putting some lines in the config file, right?
So it takes some skill. It takes some sort of skill. It's not as simple as double clicking a file.
You have to edit a file and put some lines in. But I mean, if you're running your own node, you've already gone past that stage anyway. You've already started up. So yeah.
Okay. And I think we touched on this. I just wanted to make sure because I'm not 100% sure. Ripple at one point in time was going to implement user verification. Is that a myth?
That is a myth.
Okay.
I think what that goes back to the FinCEN paper that you've recently read, in which they mention something along the lines of the Ripple will comply with whatever AML stuff comes up, whatever. And basically that is Ripple doing that for, I think, their products. There's nothing that's been implemented in the XRP ledger.
Can it be implemented? Now? If FinCEN came at Ripple and said, you know what, we're not going to see Ripple and XRP as two separate entities, not happening. You need to implement user verification. Is that even possible?
Not unless they had agreement with 80% of the rest of the network, which Ripple wouldn't have. Ripple have, they control 10% of the network, right?
And is that a debatable point? Is there or is there a confirmed fact that?
That's confirmed. You can go. There's lists online at xrpcharts.com. There's minivalist.cinn. I think there's a site, xrpscan.com. I think as well. There's a few sites out there that show what's on the network, right? And
at this point in time, it's not a debatable thing. Ripple owns 10%, and the Globe consensus, whatever, the Globe owns 90%.
Yeah, that order of magnitude. The numbers might not be exactly right, but it's that
ballparking.
Definitely way off of the 80% that they would need in order to do that.
And
right?
for to anyone that's watching this, if better numbers come along, let's post them. But for the sake of a conversation and keeping it moving, I don't want people to be all Sorry, hold on. I don't want people to be trolling numbers because we're just throwing out ballpark figures. If better numbers come along and discussion needs to arise as a result of that, then let's do it. But I just let's stick to a 90-10 Ripple with concentration 10, Globe with 90. And in order for anything to change, it requires, I believe you said, in order for an amendment to take place, was it 80%?
Yeah, 80% support. So the Ripple protocol has in it support for amendments, and this seems to be a bit like the BIP. You corrected on Twitter that the blockchain improvement proposals are voted on. I didn't realize that they were voted on by the network itself. There's a similar thing in the XRP ledger. Every 256th ledger, I think it's called the flag ledger. I might have the number wrong, but it's something like that. Every so often, there's a ledger in which a vote can take place, and a amendment has to have over 80% support for 2 weeks in order to be ratified.
Interesting. Now, if there is an 81% agreement, is there a hard fork, or does Ripple does XR everything have to move on to the new chain?
No, there's not a hard fork. Just it just doesn't happen, right? If they don't get enough, if they get enough, then what happens is the amendment then gets basically put into practice, and all of the validators have to then update to the version that supports the functionality of that amendment.
So 19% that lost still have to upgrade in order to participate.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. They would still have to upgrade in order to participate. Otherwise, they become what's called amendment locked, which means that they would no longer be able to participate in the validation process.
So they would essentially be automatically or is the download a choice? Is this like an auto update, or is this something that they would say, you know what, I disagree with Ripple, I'm part of the 19%, I'm done, and they would just unplug?
It's not an auto update. If they didn't support it, they would be excluded automatically.
Understood.
They have to download and upgrade the version of Ripple to support that. And this has happened. So Ripple, there's been a number of amendments. If you go onto the Ripple website, you can or the developer.ripple.com, I think it's under. There's a list of amendments that have been passed over time. Some have been like small bug fixes and changes in the protocol. Some have been new specific features. So, for example, Ripple themselves created a feature called checks, right? Checks is in an analogy to the paper thing that you write and sign and give them out on. And the idea behind that was to create a thing where I could send you some XRP, but the transfer doesn't actually happen until you actually deposit that check into your account, right? So it's a delayed payment. And the reason for that was to allow somebody to refuse to accept a payment, right? So they could have, for whatever policy reasons, they might not want to accept random payments from random people.
Okay.
And you would have this thing in which a check would come in, and they could choose whether or not to deposit it or whether to reject it.
Interesting.
Right? So, and that was to allow certain additional, financial workflows to be built upon the ledger, and that was an amendment that was created by Ripple, but it never actually got support from the rest of the network to be implemented.
Okay.
So it didn't live.
So that was an example of Ripple having, without, Ripple not being as centralized as as a Bitcoin maximalist would say.
Exactly.
Because
it's an example.
The consensus of the other validators disagreed with that implementation, and Ripple Labs they lost.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very educational. Now there's one thing I wanted to hit. What is your take on I believe it's something around 33,000 missing blocks or something? Is that a threat? Is that, A, are you aware of it? B, is what is it significant? What does it mean? What are the implications? Let's just dive into that real quick.
Sure. Yes, I'm aware of it. So what it is in the very early days of the XRP ledger, there was a bug in the code, and there was, I believe, it was something like a hard disk ran out of space on a server, right? And there was a bug in the code, and because the ledger hadn't actually been officially launched publicly yet, it was still kind of pretty much internal. There were not that many servers running it. The bug was replicated on all of the servers, and as a result, the headers of the first 32,000 ledgers were corrupted. So the transactions are there, but the headers are no longer. So you can't actually validate the checksum, go walk your way back through the chain to validate that they're all correct.
Now,
but you can.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Exactly. So in that time, in that 30,000 blocks, and I think that if I remember rightly, that space of time was about a week or two in actual elapsed time, right? That occurred, but that comprised of something like 300 transactions in total. Because remember, the ledger wasn't even public at the time, so there was only a little bit of testing going on. Now, one of the differences between the XRP ledger and Bitcoin I mentioned is that the XRP ledger stores complete full state in each ledger. It stores the balances. So on the next block after this, you have a full record of all of the balances of all of the accounts in the ledger. And that adds up to the full, 100 billion or whatever XRP. So, after that happened, exactly what all the balances were. There's nothing that can be hidden. It's not like there's some hidden account that's going to come out of nowhere that has some, with Bitcoin, there could be, if you missed a block somehow, there could be a transaction in there that makes a material difference. With
that's like you're talking about a speculative, fantasy. If this is nothing that's happened, okay.
If it happened, then there could be hidden within there a transaction that would make a material difference to the balances. Therefore, right, going forward. On the XRP ledger, there's not that, because the full balances are stored in every single ledger. So literally every 3 seconds, it's storing the full state of every single account, right? That's why you don't need, when you start a new node up, you don't need to download the entire history like you do with Bitcoin. You just need the last few ledgers, because those ledgers contain the full state. So how much XRP is in every single account just by getting the last ledger, right? And so the fact that those blocks are missing at the start, or they're not missing, like I said, the headers are corrupted, they're not actually missing, actually makes no material difference.
Okay.
And it was before the blockchain even launched. So it was like, again, if you had a time machine and went back, would it make sense to completely reset and zero everything at that point? Yeah, it probably would. But I would imagine at the time, they probably didn't know, okay, this is going to be the one, until it was the one. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They know when they're going to reset it, and maybe they thought, okay, we'll reset it at some point, and then, okay, this is getting, people are using this, so we can't reset it now, so let's just run with it. And like I said, there's nothing nefarious that could be hidden in there.
Yeah.
We know the full roots. So yeah, it's all there.
It's a non-issue, is what you're saying. It's something that happened, but there's nothing to it, no substance, no weight on it being any sort of negative, malicious act or anything like that.
Exactly. And so, I mean, what they actually do is they actually redefine the Genesis ledger in the code to be the 32,000th or whatever block, right? And they say that's the Genesis ledger now, to prevent you going further back than that. But it's in the same way that the 0th block is the first block in the Bitcoin blockchain. You could imagine in like some hypothetical world that there's a -1, -2, -3, -4 that came before that, right?
Okay.
At some point, Satoshi said, okay, this is the one we're going public with, and all the previous test transactions I'm disregarding. In this case, they decided to keep them on and keep going rather than reset it. So it's just a different approach.
So understood. Yeah, in theory, there could have been some sort of Bitcoin testnet, but I mean, the Genesis block was essentially 0.0.
Yeah.
And we've moved on from there. Now, I'm just checking real quick our message, just so that I can make sure I feel like we've done a lot of good work here. I think this is I'm going to let me just find this before I say anything. All right, so let's see, XRapid, XCurrent. What was the other one? The third?
Oh, XVIA.
XVIA, yeah.
XVIA or XVIA is an API that allows banks to, or anybody, companies mainly, I think it's aimed at, to make transactions. So one company could instruct a bank that is on RippleNet to make a transaction on their behalf. So it's like sending an instruction to that bank to go and do it without that company needing to actually be connected to RippleNet themselves or connected to the XRP ledger or anything.
Okay, understood. Yeah. We've hit amendments. Amendments require 81%, or is it 80% or greater?
80 or greater, I think. Yeah.
Okay, 80 or greater percent in order for there to be the implementation of an amendment, and that is voted on through validators, any type of validator. And I remember you discussed there are two types of validators. Do both have the same power to vote on an amendment?
So there's two types of nodes: a stock node and a validator, right? And they're both
Okay.
they both run the same code base. It's like one line difference in the config file, because a stock node does exactly the same thing a validator does, but it doesn't publish its votes effectively.
So
right?
so it's the equivalent of running like a a mining node is the only one that can vote on an improvement proposal, and a full node cannot. A full node is essentially like a validator node, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
this would be kind of a parallel that there's a stock node that is not capable of voting on an amendment, and then you have a validator node which is capable of voting on amendments.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've hit that. Is there anything in particular you'd like to discuss? Is there any points in general that you feel like the audience would benefit from understanding?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think
the quick lesson.
One thing I will just bring up, because again, it does get mentioned sometimes, talking about validators and that, is that one thing that people come up with and say, well, what about a Sybil attack? So but for the audience, a Sybil attack is when you have a whole load of random nodes come and join the network, and they try and basically outvote the honest nodes. And somebody says, well, what if I just created 2,000 validators and joined the network? Surely I could then vote on anything. And the answer to that is they couldn't, because their vote would only count if somebody else known on the network is listening effectively to them, right? So they would have to be meshed in with that Venn diagram. And
so is this like the equivalent of a 51% attack in theory?
It is to a degree, yes. But again, the only thing that you could do with the sort of equivalent of a 51% attack on the XRP ledger is disagree, right? So you can't, because you don't have the rule that longest chain wins, because there isn't this sort of speculative chain, or whatever you want to call it, the unconfirmed sort of chain going forward, right? Once a ledger is closed, once a block is closed, that's it. It's final. It can never be rewritten. There's not some rule that says there might be another block that might come along in the future that has greater proof of work or whatever. There's nothing else that can overwrite that. So it's final at that point. So yeah, that's again one of the differences. So a 51% attack on the XRP ledger, the only thing you could do is basically cause disruption by disagreeing with everything. And if you just continually disagreed, then you wouldn't get anywhere. And the ledger
other nodes would just say, "Shut up, we're not listening to you."
Exactly. So you and 9 friends are trying to decide whether to go to Pizza Hut or McDonald's, right? And you're getting to a consensus, and 20 random drunk people wander past and start shouting McDonald's at you, right? You're not going to listen to them. So there's nothing they can do, right?
Okay, and there's kind of like what we did earlier. There's no no elephant in the room there, in your opinion?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
And finally, shoot, my thing just went to a different portion of our messaging. I probably should have written this down, but anyways, what is there? Fees are low. Who gets the fees, and what's the deal with burns? And I guess the last 3 topics that you and I messaged about would be fees, burns, and a supply increase. But the supply increase, I am assuming, is answered by the amendment process. Is there any way for Ripple Labs, if say they got drunk and wanted to increase the total market cap, there's nothing they could do to do that? That would require an amendment. Okay.
That would require an amendment, because at the moment there's not even the ability to increase the supply, right? The function does not even exist. Not like could somebody use it, but it doesn't even exist, right? The ledger has no way to deal with. If you suddenly came up and said, "Hey, I've got an extra 100 million XRP," the ledger has there's nothing it can do with it, right? It just doesn't know what to do with that anyway, right?
Okay.
And then not only each and every node runs, there's a series of checks that each and every node does, what are called invariant checks, that checks that a transaction doesn't violate some fundamental rules. So, for example, a transaction could never end up with more XRP than it started with, right?
Okay. Yeah, of course.
So that's a hard rule that every node, validator or non-validator, checks. And if that was somehow violated by somebody, then that transaction would not be applied to the ledger, right? So it just simply would not get recorded. You know, if I manage to somehow create a dummy version of the protocol and say, hey, look, guys, I got this extra 100 billion, the transaction just wouldn't be accepted because all the other nodes would go, you can't end up with more than you started with. So there's no way to supply. Yeah.
Oh, and not even through an amendment. There's no way to increase the supply.
It would have to be a pretty significant amendment to remove those checks.
Now, this would be like the equivalent of a hard fork in a way.
I guess so. Yeah, I guess it would be the equivalent of a hard fork. I mean,
I'm just trying to use terminology that people, you know, from different crypto spheres can relate to. You know what I'm saying?
Now, if 81% or if 80% or whatever agreed, then it would be effectively a soft fork, right? If 80% we're gonna increase the amount, then that would go ahead and that would all be perfectly smooth, right?
Yeah.
And so the total amount of XRP suddenly jumps from 100 billion to 200 billion all of a sudden, right? And you know, and that if 80% agreed, then that's fine, because again, the kind of golden rule of all of this is that in any decentralized system, the only thing a decentralized system can do is effectively the will of the majority. Because there's nothing that can prevent. There's no like minority that can prevent you from doing what you want to do, right? So, you know, if somebody says, well, what happens if 80% agreed to do that? Well, if 80% agreed to do that, then that's fine. You know, that's what the majority want now.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, I agree. Free market.
Exactly. If 80% decided that we want to build AML and KYC into the XRP ledger, and 80% agreed, then that would happen because that's what 80% want, right?
Would that turn you off? In that, you know, are you kind of in the space to as a cypherpunk, you know, trying to you know, get off the grid financially, or are you in this for, you know, other reasons?
I wouldn't want that personally. I don't think that's something that belongs in the XRP ledger. You know, my main view is that the XRP ledger should be pretty minimal in what it does, and it does effectively one thing, and it does it really well. You know, somebody pointed out recently, I don't think it was you, but it was somebody I was talking to recently, pointed out the number of commits to the code base of Ripple, and they showed that like 5 or 6 years ago, the number of commits dropped massively, and they're like, well, is it dead? It's like, well, no, it's not dead, but for 5 or 6 years, it's been running perfectly stably and perfectly fine. So the only real changes have been minor changes, right? There's been nothing to change.
You know, and that's a good point. I'm going to say that's a really good point. If there aren't commits and it's working just fine, you know what? If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Okay. Now, and you're saying it's working fine. There really aren't any issues that, you know, no elephants in the room that we've really said are, you know, threats.
No, there's some sort of small minor ones that like little improvements that people are doing. The one big one that may be coming up in the future is there's a new consensus protocol that has been developed called Cobalt, that a couple of the Ripple developers have written a white paper on, and that may be implemented, and that basically replaces the actual core of the consensus algorithm. It would still have all of the properties that we talked about, but just the internal process by which it works means that rather than a ledger every 3 seconds, it could be as fast as every 1 second. And so that means that the capacity would increase, the speed of the transactions would increase, and it also has a side effect as well, or another property that, whereas I said the most somebody could do is cause disruption, cause the ledger to halt, with Cobalt, that's much harder to do, right? The ledger would continue to make forward progress in a wider range of circumstances than currently. So that is a potential future development. As far as I'm aware, it's not even being developed yet. It's a white paper, a whole, sums and algorithms, and looks pretty good. But as far as I'm aware, it's not actually being developed yet. It would be an improvement, but it's not like it's necessary at the moment.
Hey, well, sometimes it's okay, right? If there's something that's screaming progress, then why not? And now, I mean, is it even worth taking a look at burns?
Well, okay, so burns, I mean, that's probably quite simple to answer. With each transaction, there is a fee, and that fee is burn. And so those XRP that are burnt as part of that fee just simply no longer exist.
Now, it goes 6 zeros past the decimal point. That's we agreed was 10 million.
It's 6 zeros. So it's 1 million. It's 1 million drops per XRP, and the minimum. The minimum fee is 10 drops, right? Or 12
minimum drops. Fee. Okay, so like the equivalent of a Satoshi being the smallest unit of Bitcoin, a drop is the smallest unit of an XRP.
Yep, exactly.
Token or coin?
Coin, I say, but token coin, I guess. I don't see much of a difference, really. I mean, I think that the only distinction I've ever heard people use is that coins have their own blockchain and tokens run on another blockchain. So an ERC token, running on the Ethereum blockchain. So from that regards, I would say XRP is a coin, not a token. But I'm not bothered either way with the terminology there.
Yeah, I'm not gonna split hairs there. So a burn is essentially a very small piece of of the equation. I mean, in theory, with 100 billion tokens out there, it's going to take a very long time to burn enough to entertain the possibility of increasing the market cap.
Oh yeah, we still have a total of I can't remember what it is. It's total XRP. Let's just look up here.
900
99 billion 991 million. Yeah, so
it was very small amount burned so far.
Now you can voluntarily put a bigger fee on. I could, if I wanted to, could put a fee on of my entire stash of XRP and burn it. If I was feeling particularly stupid, I could do that, right? And that would remove that entirely. And there have been instances in which some algorithm somewhere on somebody's bot has gone a bit haywire and started increasing the fee. And I think similar things happened on Bitcoin as well, in which you see some transaction going through with just stupidly high fees for no apparent reason, right? And that people do stupid things on any blockchain.
And so just to throw this out there, there's no chance of any kind of crazy action like how there was in the Bcash fork war. There's no dissenting parties that are going to fork and fight. XRP has a pretty unified vision and goal, and there isn't any kind of room for that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty unified. I think from what I understand of from an outside, sort of more of an outside perspective, looking at the Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin thing, is that a lot of that decision is, a lot of that sort of split is based upon disagreements on how to solve particular problems. So from my understanding, it's mainly to do with scaling. There's different ways to scale Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Cash want to do it one way, Bitcoin want to do it another way. You got ABC, SV, etc. I'm sure there's other aspects to that too, but it seems like that scaling seems to be one of the big points as to why there's that disagreement. And in XRP, there's not a scaling problem to solve.
Yeah, that's kind of the question. Is there's really nothing in XRP Ripple that's causing any sort of divisions. There's if there was, what just to play out that scenario, what would happen? Say there's two XRP camps that completely disagree over an implementation. Now, what would happen in that event?
Well, I guess what would happen is one of them would set up a separate set of validators and basically encourage people to join them and effectively not be overlapping with the rest of the network, and that would effectively be a fork. effectively.
Okay,
right?
so that would basically one would say, hey, that's XRP, and we're using XRD, or
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And there has actually been somebody in the community recently who has tried to do something like that. They actually did it slightly differently, and what they did is they took the code base and just started running separate servers and said, okay, we've taken a snapshot of the ledger at this point, and we've renamed everything from XRP to, I can't remember, take your example, XRD. I can't remember what they called it, but they called it something else and said, okay, we're going to have our own one. And everyone sort of looked at them and said, why? What's the point? And as far as I'm aware, I don't think it's had any traction at all. I think it was just somebody thinking, oh, I'm going to do my own thing, and quickly realizing that there's no value in doing that. So
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, is there a topic that you think would be valuable to discuss? Before we close the door.
I don't think so. I don't think there's. I don't think so. I think one of the things that I will sort of bring up a little bit that I see. There's a lot of animosity towards the XRP community and Ripple, especially on Twitter, and comes from various other communities as well. There's a lot we get from Bitcoin. There seems to be strangely a large amount that comes from Digibyte. I don't know if they attack everybody. I don't know, but there's XRP kind of. I don't know. It's the cool one to hate. I think is probably a way of describing it. I think.
Well, keep in mind, someone like me, like I just can't digest a pre-mine. To me, there's just no circuit. Yeah,
that's fine.
So
you've got your reason. That's fine. Everybody doesn't agree. There's not going to be one true currency. I don't believe. Okay, as a maximalist, of course, you believe there is going to be.
Well, you're saying that you're a Ripple maximalist, but you do believe in a multi-coin, potentially a multi-coin ecosystem. Is kind of what I'm.
And actually, interestingly, Ripple themselves think that XRP is not going to be the one true coin, because Ripple themselves created a thing called Interledger, and Interledger is a protocol to join multiple blockchains, so you can send a transaction. So hopefully, in an ideal world, in the future, I'm going to be able to say, okay, send you 100 XRP. And it's going to send it to you and go, oh, actually, he likes Bitcoin, convert it to Bitcoin, and it turns up in your account as Bitcoin, as one completely atomic transaction, right?
So atomic is the keyword.
And it doesn't matter, I send it to your email address, and it doesn't matter what chain you're on. In the same way, it doesn't matter. I don't care what email provider you use, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care who your internet service provider is. And so, ILP is going to join a lot of that together. And so I think a lot of the tribalism is ultimately going to be, futile, because it's not going to matter, because you want to stick with Bitcoin, fine, you stick with Bitcoin. I'm still going to be able to transact with you, even though I want to stick with XRP. You want to stick with Bitcoin. There'll be a bridge in the middle that will allow us to transact regardless. It doesn't matter.
So it's kind of a funny way to close the door to the animosity argument. It's like, well, there doesn't really need to be animosity and hatred in the space as much as there is. I do agree it is a competitive space. I don't agree it needs to be vicious. And you're saying, like, you guys that are Joe, you're being a Bitcoin maximalist attack dog here. And that's actually not sustainable, because at some point I'm going to be able to send you XRP and you're going to accept it in Bitcoin, and we're all going to be happy in this rosy dandy world, right?
Exactly.
That's an interesting argument. Obviously, I have my thoughts on the competitive element of cryptocurrency, what Bitcoin did that other cryptocurrencies cannot do and cannot replicate. But this overall, I would say, to everyone watching, I want you to know, I think we need to put our weapons down and we need to talk. And in this discussion with you, I've learned a lot. And I'm not going to be, an XRP maximalist here, but I'm also not going to be saying, throwing out my middle finger and screaming at everyone that uses XRP. And unless there is a valid concern, I want to speak with other devs, and I want to keep this channel open. I hope everyone agrees that more education is valuable, and we can continue this process, right?
I think so, and thank you for that. That would be most welcome. I mean, one of the things that I see a lot of, and I spend a lot of time, I mean, hence discovering your tweets on Twitter. I spend a lot of time, conversing with people on Twitter, and there's a lot that comes around because of a lack of knowledge about how XRP works, and there's a lot of misinformation out there that people latch onto. I mean, we've got, just when was it, this week, last week, there's a an article contributed to Forbes, right, by Jason Bloomberg, I
Jason
think.
Bloomberg, yeah.
Is Ripple a scam, right? Now, I find it hard that you can go straight from I don't think something's going to succeed to I think it's a scam. I think that's a really long jump to suddenly take, right? And then in that article, there's major fundamental misunderstandings about XRP and Ripple. So he states in the article that Ripple control what transactions go on the network, and they don't. They just do not. That is just categorically not true. In the same way that Coinbase don't control what transactions go on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? And so yet you get that kind of stuff being given airtime in sites like Forbes, which is just it's just ridiculous that the kind of level of misinformation has got to that point. And actually, Jason Bloomberg, the interesting thing with that guy is, like, 5 days earlier, he writes an article saying about how he dislikes all permissionless blockchains, and he says he thinks that permissioned blockchains like Ripple are going to be the future. So I think the guy is just very confused, because the XRP ledger is permissionless, but the fact that he would hold it up and one moment say, I think this is an example of what could be the future, and then 5 days later say, I think this is a scam. That people like that, I think, need to be looking a little bit at their own integrity.
Of course, yeah. We need to talk. We need to, if there's a problem, and it's that extreme, yeah. We need to observe facts, and if you're not observing facts, then that's kind of a personal thing. We're going to agree there.
Yeah.
So
great.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. This was a great opportunity for everyone to learn. I guess, I don't think you converted me, but I do think this was a great conversation, and I was happy to explore the facts with you, and I hope to continue to do that. If there's any stuff that we feel like we should discuss or revisit, I'm happy to do that, and let's get some other input from the XRP audience and their experiences, and let's have some more live debates or discussions.
That was great. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, and I'll be in touch. We'll be talking on Twitter and stuff.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, then.
Okay, so for everyone still around, I just want to say this was, brought to you by BLOCKTV. It's a very neutral media organization. We're trying to provide, an in-depth understanding of the space, and we will be exploring the facts. And that's going to be my approach. I hope we can bring people from all different communities to observing these facts that we're going to discover together. Now, this is a two-way street. I saw the chat moving so fast. Unfortunately, I couldn't address every single thing. Everyone, it was hard to pay attention to, these brilliant words, right? And to see all this chat. So if there's something that you guys want to discuss, please at me on Twitter at Joe Saz. If there's, message me, email me, joe@blocktv.com. I'll work on smiling a bit more. I usually smile when I'm talking. When I'm the one talking, I'm a little more interactive. But I was paying close attention because I was one of Ripple's XRP's greatest skeptics, right? I'm pretty sure everyone would agree with that. So I was paying very close attention. I didn't want to didn't want to blink my eyes. So I agree. I'll work on my smile a little bit, and I'll hopefully have more input in other debates and conversations. So we'll keep working, and we'll keep constantly putting ourselves in pursuit of the facts. And thank you all so much for tuning in. Is there anything, I'm looking at the comments right now, is there anything you guys would like me to discuss on a personal level, about maximalism, anything that any of the viewers want to stick around for and have me explain? Yeah, it's going to be tough to convert me. But yeah, I'm sticking around for Matt. Pleasure to see you there. Yeah, so if I'm not getting any questions, so yeah, again, message me at Joe Saz, Joe_Saz on Twitter, and I'm looking forward to further educated, fact-based, and very open-minded debates. All right, everyone, take care. I'm out. and have a great, have a great evening on behalf of me and Block TV.